So today's guest with your Law Firm Success podcast is Danae Shell of Valla. I don't know how many of you have heard of Valla, but it's a really, really interesting, disruptive, consumer-focused employment law offering using elements of generative AI, technology, and a desire to provide everyone with access to justice and help when they need it most. I've been watching Valla's progress from a distance, from a short period now. I've become a bit more involved recently as a result of the crowdfunding exercise, and I think you're going to find this episode with Danae really, really interesting. Danae and Valla have been real innovators and disruptors within the employment law space. I think that would be fair to say.
We're working on it, yeah.
Although you're probably still, I would say, relatively unknown within the actual legal sector itself. Certainly when I've mentioned your name to a few actual lawyers, they've been like, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a surprise, actually. We've been focused a lot on talking to consumers directly, and so are just now building up those relationships with the law firms that can help them too. And
can you tell me a bit about yourself and Valla, please?
Sure. So a bit about my background. So I'm American, from Tennessee. I got rid of the accent. And then I moved over here to do my master's, fell in love with Edinburgh, decided to stay. And basically I've worked in the startup scene in Scotland my whole career. I was a software engineer and then somehow fell into marketing via like a webmaster role and worked at Free Agent, which is, for people who don't know, it's online accounting software for micro businesses. So learned a lot about a really similar profession with accountancy, watched the digitization of that happen. At the very beginning, Free Agent and accountants didn't get on, and then later they did. So I learned a lot about what it means to, support an industry rather than go directly against them. And then worked a few more jobs as like managing director, chief marketing officer, but got really interested in the law because as you get more senior as a woman in technology, you become more rare. It's generally quite a male-dominated field. And you also tend to get more people coming to you looking for support or advocacy when something goes wrong at work. And I just kept seeing these stories over and over of like bad things that happened to people. And the story always ended with, so then they just left because they couldn't do anything about it. And being American, I was like, but they have rights. Why can't they use their rights? And so basically discovered like the access to justice gap, the problem that a lot of people have, being able to do anything about an issue if their salary doesn't warrant enough to actually pay the legal fees, and thought, goodness, there's something really similar here from what I did with accountancy. So that was like the origin of Valla, of saying, well, what does it look like to apply digital tools to this problem in the same way that nobody goes to an accountant anymore with like a Tesco bag full of receipts? So why are lawyers still having to comb through like this, 5 million attachments onto an email kind of a situation? And what would it mean if we could make that easier? What new business opportunities would that open up?
Okay, because typically the employment law space as being a difficult one, and a difficult one for law firms to make money from. And I imagine that would be then why you were able to, or you were identifying this access gap.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I first started speaking to employment lawyers, and I would say, what are some of the questions you would ask on a first phone call? And one of the first questions would be, what is your salary? And I said, oh, that's interesting. Why are you asking that? And they would say, if they're below a certain salary, even if everything is absolutely valid with the claim, I wouldn't be able to get back my fees in what they would win. So it just wouldn't be worth it for them to hire me. And I was like, oh, like it's a delivery model problem, right? It's just like that model can't service people below a certain salary. And that salary, because of the cost of living crisis and everything else, just kept creeping up and up and up. And so that gap just kept widening.
Okay, and so tell me, the initiation of the concept of Valla, your initial business planning, because as far as I understand it, what you're doing now is quite different from what your objectives were when you started out.
Yeah, the objective was always the same. So it was always this, why can't more people have legal services, as just a general idea. But our first hypothesis was, we got really interested in discrimination in particular, because we started looking at how a lawyer could help somebody and saying, well, what are the things that take the most time or have the most uncertainty in them? And one of the things that came up was the Injury to Feelings Award within discrimination, which is, a huge range. It's like from £1,000 to about £50,000 or something like that. And I mean, an employment lawyer can ballpark it, but it's not easy to communicate to a user why they're ballparking it that way. And, a £2,000 problem to someone can be a really big deal, a really big difference, just a couple of £1,000s. And so we thought, actually, we could build a data platform. We could make this super efficient. We could add a lot of insight to estimates when lawyers are talking to potential clients. And we could, add a lot of efficiency to the process. What we learned, though, was we assumed if you could make things more efficient, then law firms can move down market and support more people. But what we learned, and I should have known it already because accountants had the exact same problem, is law firms aren't set up to move down market. So the efficiency isn't going to lead to, opening up of the market. And that's when I thought, we'll open up the market. We'll go directly to the consumers. We'll help them. And then if they need to interact with the legal system, we can act as that interaction point.
Okay. And so can you tell me a bit more about the history of the business in terms of a timeline, your sort of usage to date?
Yeah.
What your trajectory is, because I know it's taken a steep upward curve recently.
Yeah. Well, we started working on the idea in 2020, but
when you say we, who do you?
Oh, so it was my original co-founder, Kate, and I to begin with. And startups are rocky. So Kate had to get a proper job somewhere along the way, as startups go. But now there's actually a team of 8 of us. And we hired our first employees, I think it was in 2021, and started building the Valla that we launched, the Valla that we are today in 2022.
And how were you funding this?
We had venture capital investment in 2020. Techstart Ventures here in Scotland and Ascension Ventures down south invested in us. We had a couple of Innovate UK grants. And then when we decided to build Valla as it is today, we got a bunch of angel investors with B2C experience in. So people like Tom Blomfield from Monzo. We also asked Gary Turner from Xero to join. So Xero was the one that beat Free Agent, really. So I called him up and said, tell me how you beat us. And so he ended up joining as an investor. Because I often think of us as like Xero for the law, similar kind of model. So we launched in 2020 with basically a really basic case management platform for litigants in person in employment tribunal.
So was it a typical V1 type product, i.e. very basic?
Totally. Like it had a case chronology tool, and it had, we had a couple of templates that people could use, and we started working on the ET1 template and a few of those main templates for like a grievance and things like that. And we partnered with Pregnant Then Screwed, the charity, with maternity discrimination cases, and a few people from PTS kind of co-created with us. They ran their case through the platform, and then they would tell us everything that was wrong.
Right, okay. And
so we kind of built it up from there. And then things started to pick up a lot once I started going onto TikTok in 2020. It was late 22, early 23, and started just answering people's questions about, was that really discrimination at work? How would I tell? How would I even figure that out? Or what happens after I submit a tribunal claim? Or what is a preliminary hearing?
So these were questions that you made up and then answered yourself, or were these questions that were actually being asked? Actually
being asked. And still, even now, like if I go live on TikTok, it's just like a fire hose of questions about the process. Like, how much does it cost? How does this even work? What is an ET1? How do I figure out my claims? All these really specific questions. And so I just answer them as rapidly as I can so that people can just get a sense of the process.
And to go back, just before we go on to that, because I know that's been a fundamental driver of the growth of your business, and there's points there for lawyers around that. But to get a sense of your journey to date in terms of, you can go into as much or as little detail as you want, just to give us an idea, the usage levels, where you are on a sort of financial trajectory. I know you did the crowdfunding exercise.
Yeah.
I was involved in that myself, so I'm hoping make a serious return there.
I'm working on it. Yeah, so we 10x'd our first year after launch in terms of revenue. We've had about 10,000 cases on the platform so far. And I can't remember how many, so we have a free version of the platform with the case chronology and things like that. So that's the 10,000. And then a big chunk of those people will also purchase a template like the grievance or the ET1. And then people also use what we call tribunal coaching.
Okay.
So it's not representation, but it is someone who has litigation experience helping people understand what is a preliminary hearing and how do I get ready for it. And now we're continuing to grow month on month really significantly. And that's being driven by, as you say, mostly social media, organic. We actually don't do any paid advertising.
Yeah. And would you like some water?
Oh, I've got some. Thanks.
There are a lot of law firms out there that generate a substantial amount of their business online.
Yeah.
And this is typical of the firms that we work with. They primarily use paid ads, organic search on Google. Social media was, to a certain extent, or certainly was for a period, something that was mooted as being an option for law firms, but largely ignored as a result of experience, and that most people will engaged with social channels when they actually needed something. Rather than browse, I'm going to just browse for legal issues. So you started using TikTok. Was that on purpose?
Sort of. I got a colleague from one of my old marketing teams to just test it out as a channel for us. Those tests didn't really go well when we were trying trending things and things like that. It flopped. But I am a avid TikTok user personally. Right. And so I understood the channel really well. And there was one day, I can't remember what the activity was, but something bad had happened to one of the clients that I was using the platform, and I was really angry on her behalf. And I basically just posted a rant on TikTok saying, this is a tactic that I see people use, and I really don't think it's ethical, and I don't think it's right. And I posted that, and that almost immediately got 20,000 views. And I was like, oh, so there is something here. And so then I started experimenting with it and realized there's the thing about TikTok that I think a lot of people don't realize is that I think about it as the new Google, in the sense that TikTok is replacing Google as a search engine for more and more people. As Google's quality of results declines, and because TikTok often is just a 1-minute video or a 5-minute video that just gets to the point, a lot of people are shifting over to TikTok to do kind of long tail or transactional queries. So my background as an SEO marketer, I just shifted my content production over from Google articles to TikTok videos, and then repurposed those videos across YouTube and then back onto my website as a Google article, because it's actually faster to produce content as video than it is to write an in-depth article, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense, because it will take you, 3 or 4 minutes to produce a video which has, I don't know how many words. You'll be able to tell me better than I can probably estimate, that can then be transcribed into written content, which you can then optimize, etc., for your site.
Exactly.
And with TikTok, do you see, or are you experiencing more people using it than were doing so when you begun using it? Have you noticed an upswell?
Oh, in terms of users overall?
Yeah, but also those who are interacting with your type of content and coming to you with legal issues that you can help resolve? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that's the algorithm, because it's very good at finding more people. People come to us and they're like, how did it know that I was having this issue at the moment? And then it'll just pop up, and they'll say, goodness, that's exactly what I needed. So the algorithm is very good at targeting people once you get good at creating content that can be targeted. And yeah, absolutely. To me, there's a direct correlation between the amount of content that you publish and how well your reach is for any given month. Although TikTok is also quite good for long tail, like you are rewarded for having a bank of content on TikTok that can be accessed via search. But the more you publish regularly, the more views and the more audience you will create.
Okay. And so does that then become a bit of a sort of hamster wheel for you?
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's and in fact, I don't publish a lot at the moment because we've kind of validated it as a channel. If you think about as a startup, I'm not yet building a business. I'm building a market exploration machine that I can scale into a business once I've understood my different channels and things like that. So I've validated TikTok as a channel, so I don't have to keep publishing on it right now because I kind of understand how it works. So now we're off testing different things, but we still get the long tail kind of benefit of TikTok and YouTube and Google SEO and things like that.
Okay, so you've effectively done a large part of your product market fit and testing by using TikTok as a channel, and that as opposed to the typical sort of B2B exercise where you would have your product being used by businesses providing you feedback. You've had it with individual users.
Yeah.
And now you're at the stage where you are refining on an ongoing basis your product market fit without having, is there as much of a desire to keep growth in terms of user base?
Yeah. So I think definitely it's more like, as an early stage startup, a lot of what we're doing is we're trying to find the levers so that we can pull them when we want to. And so it's nice to know that I can pull the lever if I want to. If I wanted to get back on the hamster wheel and publish a lot of content, I absolutely can. But I'm also off searching for other levers that might not be quite so hamster wheely. And so I'm still looking around for other channels.
Yeah. And what would you suggest for law firms, smaller law firms, in terms of the use of TikTok?
Oh, I see so much really good stuff. There's a lot of American lawyers who use TikTok really well.
Yeah, I've noticed that, yeah.
And there's so many different things that I think law firms can do. I would say ignore the trends. Occasionally you might do something that actually banks on one of them, but I would just ignore them. I do. What people want on TikTok is someone who understands that they have a problem, cares about the fact that they have that problem, and can explain it to them calmly and reasonably in a succinct way. And no problem is too small to explain. I get down into the very specific part of employment law that my users have questions about, and they're tiny, tiny micro problems, but it's an enormous platform. And it's not just young people on the app now. I think a lot of people just think of TikTok as like the dancing app for young kids and stuff, but the demographics are absolutely huge now in terms of who is accessing it. And if you're just authentically you and answering a question in a helpful way, you will eventually do well. Production value and things like that, they really don't matter. In fact, I would argue that the harder you try on production on TikTok, the more you're going to get penalized initially. The more authentically kind of just rubbish you are, it works.
Because you have done it where you wear like different hats, you're just sitting at your desk, you're answering questions. How did you feel when you first started doing that? Because I know some, lawyers are generally quite self-conscious about that type of thing.
Oh, I completely understand it. And, it's kind of weird anyway, just being a woman on the internet. You never know what people are going to say about you, just in general. But actually, I've never had a problem on TikTok at all. I think their filtering is really good, but I've never even, the filters have caught any kind of negative, unnecessary negative stuff that I've ever seen. And yeah, I do when I do skits, I literally just turn my chair, wear a different hat, and then turn the chair and wear a different hat, which is like a common TikTok style. And otherwise, I'm just sitting at my desk to camera and talking. And eventually I got a little microphone to make the sound a little bit better. But even that is kind of not necessary. But you kind of have to do it to get used to it. I didn't mind too much at first because I thought, well, this is fun, let's try it. But I have tried to persuade other people to do it, and they're just like, oh, I won't look right, I won't. And the audience just, it's not that they don't care, they will actively penalize you for trying to be too slick about it. So it's better to be, just a little bit more rough.
Okay. And So you started off as a software engineer, then became a marketer.
Yeah.
But now you're, and it sounds to me as if you've got very, very comfortable with dealing with employment law advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, there may be those within our audience go, hold on a minute, she's not an employment lawyer, but you can tell me a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, you kind of had to learn. I had to learn it to build it, and I had to learn it to understand what the audience would be looking for in order to kind of build the products and the content. And so now I'm definitely not an employment lawyer, but I definitely can help people understand how the process works, how the claims structure works and things like that. And I think it's fascinating because I didn't realize until I got into this that most of the law is unreserved. And so we work with a lot of legal professionals who support our users, and some of them are qualified solicitors who are actively with a practicing certificate. Some of them don't have their certificate, and some of them aren't even solicitors. They're HR professionals, or they worked at a charity and they supported litigation that way. And it's amazing how many different ways you can get that litigation experience to be able to help people. Mm. And so, yeah, I think it's really, and it's not something that I don't think anybody really realizes outside of the industry that it is possible. But you build up a lot of knowledge over time. And then you can, at this point, I keep it really high level on social media. And then I'm like, one of our coaches can answer that one for you. And then I just send it down that way.
Yeah.
Whereas before I would have to say, oh, you need to speak to a lawyer about that. But now I can just send them to a coach, and usually that's fine. Or now we can also start to send them off to other law firms if, it's a case that's actually useful for a law firm to work with rather than the smaller cases that we typically support.
And this has been a ground-breaking offering, a very different offering within the legal space, and certainly within the more retail-oriented legal space. Mm. Where do you see the future of legal services going from a retail point of view?
I think that the delivery model of legal services is changing, and because of generative AI, will change much more rapidly now. And I think there will be a place in the market for what I kind of call a full-fat law firm, as I describe it, where everything is high touch, high kind of hand-holding, 100% representation, no unbundling, no client doing work, anything like that. And the people who can afford that, we often describe ourselves as like the IKEA of law. If you can afford to get someone to come and build a kitchen for you, then you should pay for that. They're going to do a great job. Mm. But if you can't afford that and you have to do it yourself, we'll give you the bits and the instructions. And so that unbundling, I think, is the future, where there is a different price point available for the people who can't afford the full fat version, who can take part of that work and do it themselves and work with a professional. And then right at the bottom of the market, there is more and more ability for people to just do it all themselves.
Yeah.
Because they might not have time, or they might not have money, but maybe they have time and they can do it themselves that way.
Particularly in areas that previously would have meant that they were unable to actually access a legal service and representation.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you see anyway the trend in civil, like consumer issues where people are self-representing anyway. It's nearly 1 in 3 now in the employment tribunal, for example. So people are already doing it, but they basically just have like Google to help them. Whereas now products like mine are saying, well, what if we tried a different delivery model? Can we actually produce something that is at a consumer price point, but still, it's not full fat, but still gives them, someone to check their documents for them, or someone to help them prepare for the hearing, but doesn't represent them at the hearing. So it's classic unbundling.
And how's your interaction with law firms generally?
Yeah, so I learned my lesson from watching Free Agent grow, where they were like, oh, we're going to replace accountants. And then like 5 years later, they were like, we're not going to replace accountants. And I kind of watched that whole industry grow up. And the thing that I really observed was, it's safe to say that at the beginning, online accounting software was not something that accountants wanted. They felt very threatened by it. And they were like, you're trying to steal our lunch. But what actually turned out happening was that accountants love online accounting software because it automates away the stuff that they never really wanted to do and allows them to focus more on advice. And it allows them to move down market. And they can open up their books to different kinds of clients, and they can have different often the cash profile of service businesses in professional services can be really spiky. And so online accounting software allowed them to have more kind of smaller but higher volume, repeatable, regular revenue, kind of smoothing out that cash profile. And so that's exactly what I think the legal industry is like. And so when I talk to lawyers, the kinds of questions I'm asking is, how much time does it take you to understand whether or not you want to take a case on? How much money are you spending to understand whether or not you want to take that case on? You know, do you want to collaborate to see if we can help you like understand that faster? And other than that, like we've never been like the cases that law firms can service right now are the cases that we're not interested in servicing. We're interested in the cases that people didn't have any other option for, and so they choose to self-represent. So it feels like we're just trying to fill in the blank parts of the market.
Yeah. Well, it's something that's very close to a project that we're working on, Recept.io, which is much more about automating the qualification process for firms to save them spending so much time qualifying leads that either they don't want and they know from the outset, or to get them into a situation where they're taking on the clients that they do want more quickly.
It's such an issue. And it's such a manual problem, and there's a lot of sense making you have to do in that process. And so, yeah, I think it's a really expensive problem for firms to try and solve.
Have you ever put a number on it?
When we started testing this, you know, what does it take in order for one of our coaches to make sense of a claim? And once we started measuring it, when we started, the average was 8 hours. And that was reading the documents, prepping for a call, going on a 1-hour call, talking to the user, and then giving them a report afterwards. And that was averaging out at about 8 hours. And then we started using generative AI to do a lot of the prep work on both sides. And right now we're down to 2 hours, including the 1-hour call. So it's a half hour before, a half hour after. But we're now we're taking the transcript of the call and automating the report writing.
Okay.
So we should be able to reduce that again.
Okay. And how are you using generative AI to do that currently?
So we basically, Gen AI, I think it gets a bad rap because people use the chat interface for it. And that's all where hallucinations and things like that happen. But if you use Gen AI in a much more kind of structured, guardrailed way, you can say to the AI, you can only give me back one or more of these specific answers. And I only want you to do this one task, and I've given you a ton of context and a ton of direction, and you can only pick from like these 10 things. Tell me which one of these 10 you think it is. And so what we've done is we ask the user to upload, you know, what's your grievance documents, anything you've got. And the first thing we do is we take across all the documents, we create a chronology of what's happened, because that's the first thing a lawyer asks for. And then the AI develops like a hunch as to what the key legal claims might be. And so it kind of surfaces that hunch to the coach before they go on the call. And the coach has the hunch plus the timeline, summaries of the documents, and the note from the user. And then they go on the call and they check, is that hunch right? Like, I don't know. And that's when they dig in.
Do they so the hunch is generated, I imagine, from a combination of the material plus your own carefully curated materials around employment law and all of the issues that are in that, as opposed to a broader search around the internet?
That's right, yeah. It's all our own materials. So we have a legal technologist in-house who was an employment lawyer who retrained through a coding boot camp. And she's like our bridge between the law and the product. And so she spends a lot of time basically deconstructing the law and helping the AI understand what we want from it when we send those really tightly constrained requests.
It's really interesting. And I do think it represents the use of AI in future for law firms, and discussed this actually with Callum from Amicus. But then finally, I've been watching Valla and I've been really impressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, by everything that you've done. Extremely impressed around the progress of the crowdfunding exercise, but can definitely see that this is the future of legal services. How do you see the future of Valla?
Oh, I'm so excited about it. It's so, To me, the first thing that we learned was if you help people represent themselves, you can, like, they will do it and they can do well with it. And, you know, we've seen so many people with so many great outcomes through that kind of self-representation part. And now I think Gen AI has unlocked this whole other level of opportunity for Valla, where I keep seeing that interface between consumers and the legal industry is that huge problem, that case assessment problem. So that's the next step for us, is helping consumers understand if they actually have a problem that is worth taking forward, and then helping the legal industry say, oh, is this a case for me, or is that a case for me? Or even the courts. You know, I've spoken to employment tribunal judges whose whole job is just preliminary hearings, trying to help get those cases into a serviceable format for final hearing. Whereas a case that comes through Valla is so much tidier and tighter. So yeah, for me, the big vision is allow everyone to have an option, whether it's, you know, completely DIY or all the way up to full fat. Allow everybody to get access to an option to resolve the issue if they want to. Help them understand if there is a legal issue there, and then make it as seamless as possible for them to interact with the wider legal industry, you know, saving them time and saving the legal industry so much time.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. That's the issue that creates a big time sink in law firms at the moment is dealing with people who are very uncertain.
Yeah.
And if you can actually give them the opportunity to do that research themselves.
Yeah. And even we tell people, you know, having looked at everything, I'm not sure that what you think this is what you think it is. Even just telling them that and why is helping them. Like, uncertainty is the perfect word for it. There is a huge amount of uncertainty, and just resolving that uncertainty is a product and a huge market all by itself. And then the byproduct of that is that, you know, legal professionals supporting consumers don't have to deal with resolving that uncertainty so much.
Well, thank you very much, Danae. Thanks very much for coming in, and best of luck with everything going forward.
Thank you very much.
So thanks very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying our content. We'd be delighted to hear any feedback that you have. You can find out more about the Your Law Firm Success podcast at mltdigital.co.uk/podcast. Please subscribe. Please share with your friends. Please share with anyone who you know that you think would be interested.